Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Leith Stewart. Hi Leith. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, Jules.
Good to have you here. So Leith, tell me a bit about young folk therapy and how did it come about?
So I'm an occupational therapist and young folk therapy is a clinic that I opened about 12 months ago. So I've been working as an OT in Hong Kong for about 12 years now, which just seems crazy that I've actually been in Hong Kong for that long, just as a sole practitioner. So I would just work independently in different schools or with different clients. And then I got to the stage where I realized that I maybe wanted to expand and do a little bit of a different role, still doing the hands-on therapy, but I realized I quite like supervising and mentoring other young OTs and sort of branching out to do different types of the business aspect as well. So I opened Young Folk Therapy. We have OTs, speech therapists and counsellors in Mongkok. We work with a whole range of families all over Hong Kong in international schools and in local schools, predominantly primary school age children, but we do some work with some high schools and kindergartners.
So what would be some of the key issues that you're dealing with when you're an occupational therapist? Because I don't really know much about it.
Very, very common question when people ask me, what do I do? And I say I'm an OT and people are like, what actually is that? So occupational therapists, we use our expertise and our experience to make life more joyful and easy for children and their families and clients. And how we do that is we look at their behaviours, we look at the way that they move, that they function in their everyday life and see how we can make things easier for them. So for example, we work with children. So we work with children with a range of difficulties or diagnosed disorders or conditions, such as children on the autistic spectrum, children with Down syndrome, developmental delay. But we also do a lot of work in schools with kids in a traditionally mainstream classroom that might have trouble with their concentration, their attention, their sensory processing, which is how that they understand and take in the sensory input into their environment. And we also work with children that have gross motor issues. So those children that maybe look a little bit clumsy or have a little bit of difficulty throwing and catching or a little bit with weak muscles, or children with fine motor difficulties. And that often manifests with handwriting difficulties. That's what the teachers are seeing in the classrooms. So we kind of work in a really broad spectrum with a whole range of children.
Wow, that's so interesting. So it's not just physical stuff though. it's also emotional, psychological.
Absolutely.
Wow, that's so cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So would you work with like dyscalculia and dyspraxia and
Yes.
stuff like that?
Absolutely. Yes.
Oh, right.
Yes. Yes.
Wow, that's so cool.
Because we kind of look at the ways, what difficulties they're having and how is that impacting on their function. So, for example, we might talk to a kid and they might really, really want to play football, but when we do our assessment, they might have really bad balance. So they can't stand on one foot and kick the ball with the other foot, or they're not being able to see the ball or the speed or the force of the ball. So we work on some of those visual spatial skills for them. And when we look at their goals, we try and tie those in with some of the family goals. And that might be to do with getting dressed at home or being able to pack their school bags. And then we also try and feed in with their school goals. So being able to manage themselves in the classroom, manage their objects and their materials. So what we try and do is get this big, big picture and then tease out the little things that are going wrong or need some intervention. And we work on those skills to try and help build that big picture for the child up again.
Wow, that's amazing. How did you decide, like, who thinks I want to be an occupational therapist?
Yes,
Especially because it's not really like a commonly thought about career. How did you decide to do it?
My friend was doing it at uni. I was a little bit lost when I was at university. I kind of knew I liked the sciences and the therapy and the rehab side of it. And my first year at university, I was doing a science degree and I had friends doing physio and speech and OT. And I just really liked the idea of occupational therapy and looked into that a little bit more because that's really quite broad. We work in rehab hospitals. We work in stroke units. We work in mental health hospitals or psychiatric hospitals. I did my placement in a locked psychiatric ward.
What was that like?
Oh, it was horrible. Hated it.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I was just really...
It would have been sad, was it?
Do you know
or
what?
Scary?
I just think as a 22-year-old, I just did not have the confidence and the skills and the knowledge to work in a locked psychiatric hospital that was predominantly men as inpatient.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting too was everyone was allowed to obviously just walk around and they had some great programs. I just don't think I had the skill or the maturity to be able to really deal with that at that age. So I was actually really, really scared and terrified a lot of the time that I was there.
Was that enough to make you question your choice of career doing that? Or were you kind of...
Oh, do you know what? While I was there, I actually did some time in the psychiatric ward and I had this really lovely supervisor who was an OT and I kind of saw a different side of the mental health issues and difficulties and when it manifests as children and there was teenagers in there who were anorexic or had really horrific backstories, big child protection issues, kids with drug abuse problems. And I quite like that side of it much more than the adults. And I think throughout my placements, I probably just always gravitated a little bit more to the kids as opposed to the adult side.
Me too. Yeah, I like working with children.
Yeah, and I think I derive a lot of that energy working from kids. And yeah, I just didn't find it as difficult or as probably as confronting as always working with adults.
Yeah, that makes sense as well.
And then I do have a funny story. When I had to do another placement in stroke rehab and I had to do shower assessments. So quite often when people have had a stroke or a traumatic brain injury, to make sure that they're safe to move on in the rehab process or to go home, they have to make sure they can shower and look after themselves. So we have to go in and watch these people shower, like properly shower. And I remember this old guy must have been about 78 and just like takes it all off and was standing there completely nude, giving himself a great wash, just having like a normal discussion about, you know, what he's going to have for dinner and then this. And I had to like tick off, like making sure he was ticking, like getting all the body parts. So I kind of knew that wasn't exactly my area of forte, but I just always remember this guy like looking at me just in complete need. I'm going, he's got that. Yes, he's ticked that and he's dried that properly.
That is so hilarious. I can't imagine doing something like that.
Every year young too.
Yeah. It'd be really intimidating actually.
Yeah,
but it does sound like a really, really diverse and interesting career. So it's great to learn a bit more about it. It's really cool. Tell me a bit about why you decided to write a blog on online learning for parents.
I think I started it personally for a way to reframe my own thoughts about going back into online learning for we are now the 5th or 6th month, I think 6 months here in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
I was really struggling as a parent to just get my head around, oh my gosh, why do we have to do this again? And so I kind of just wallowed in my own self-pity for a couple of days, just thinking all that work that we all did, that the teachers and the parents and the students for 5 months is just down the drain. It's good for nothing, even though I know it wasn't. It was to protect Hong Kong. I get it and I understand. I think this was just the way I was thinking in my head. And so I thought, okay, so what are some things that I need to do to get through this next phase of online learning? What's some really key points that maybe I could also think about as an OT to offer the families that I work with? So it was this it started off as a way for me personally to just get a bit more of a positive mind frame. And then I thought, actually, I know so many families feel this way and they're in the same boat, and I can offer some really practical suggestions that they may not have thought about in terms of the setups of the desks or how to do your morning routine or making sure that the kids are doing this in the morning. That sometimes does come quite naturally to me as an OT because it's something that I inherently do all the time and help parents with. But maybe the broader community or the broader parents might just need a little extra tips to help get their mornings running a little bit smoother. And I guess just let them know, we're all in this together, and reach out and ask some people that you can to give you some advice and help.
It's really interesting because parents are having to balance their work and their time with their children and family, and then they've got to help monitor the online learning, especially for parents of primary school students. Like, that must be really, really difficult. At least with high school kids, you can kind of tell them to get on with it, make sure they're up out of bed and check that they're turning up to all their lessons, but they should be pretty reliable. So it must be hard for primary parents.
Yeah, I found it really hard. I've only got one daughter. She's 8. And I don't think any of us thought it was going to go on for so long. So it was a bit of a fun. No one took it too seriously. And then as time went on, a lot of the families that I work with were getting fatigued and tired and exhausted and figuring out, how do we keep going? How do we make this work? I think the other big problem in Hong Kong is that most of us live in fairly small apartments, or even if those are lucky of us to live in big apartments, no one's got a backyard or places to play. So we're comparing ourselves to our Australian friends whose kids can go and jump on the trampoline, or in summertime could go and jump in the pool when they had a break. And so we need to be really careful about being able to create spaces for work and spaces for the kids to be able to do their work. But also we've got to figure out how we can get through this as parents as well. And I think that's been a massive challenge for everyone.
So what do you think that parents can do to create that space for their kids when they are in such small flats and there is no outside for the kids to play in? What should they do?
So I think that in these times of really great uncertainty, what we need to do is really create routines and define spaces. So we all know what we're doing in the morning. We all know when A needs to be on Zoom, Dad needs to be on Zoom, Mum needs to be on Zoom, and we all have our own spaces to go to. Because that way I know I can set up my day on the dining table. My daughter Isla can set up her day in her room. Nathan can set up his day in the bedroom, and if he's going back and forward to the office. So I think having your own distinct spaces is really important. And I think also making sure that the family understands each person's routine. Because I think initially it kind of looked a bit cute if the kid comes in during the Zoom, or you're
like on that report on the news that time. Yeah.
and like, that is funny. Or, you're standing there and, oh, Mum, I need this. People sort of accepted that. But now I think everyone's just like, we all just need to get on with it, and we need to have these boundaries with the kids. And children love boundaries.
They do.
It keeps them safe.
And routine, yeah.
And it keeps them on track. And having those routines very, very early on from young ages, I think really still helps set that idea of this is what's happening for the day.
It's so interesting. I was teaching a child today and I said, are you lying in bed? And she was like, yes. So she was lying down in her bed and I'm like, could you sit up and move to your desk? She's like, I don't have a desk. what, are you sitting in your bed all day to study on Zoom? And she's like, yeah, my sister needs the desk. And I was just like, could you have a chat to mum and dad and just see if they can get you a little desk? Do you have the space? She's like, oh, I don't really have the space. And it's like, okay, well, you just need to sit up and make sure you're comfortable on your bed. But it's like, gosh, you would never have that in Australia, would a kid that has no room in their bedroom just for a desk while they're Zooming at home?
No.
So it is something that we've got to be mindful of as teachers, that sometimes the kids really struggle with the space. And I've had parents, when you ask a student a question and they turn their mic on, you can hear dad Zooming in the background, like they're in the same room because they don't have the space.
Yeah.
It's really, really tough in Hong Kong for many, many families, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's a really great point. And I think being stuck in your bedroom all day having to study, that has to be difficult for your mental health as well.
It does. And that's why when I'm asking you, how can they then create the space for the well-being and the fun? What can parents do? Because many parents are also afraid to take their kids outside too much as well because of COVID.
Yeah, I think we do really have to get the kids some downtime away from their screens.
Yes, that's
100%.
important, isn't it? Because many of the kids also game as a hobby, but they need to find other hobbies that are not online, don't they?
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Because they're getting so much more screen time anyway at the moment. We know also that quite often when kids are online with their teachers or doing a Zoom, quite often they'll have their phone next to them, or they'll have I've seen children on a Zoom with me with another computer next to them. And so they've got all these tabs open and they've got all these little things going on in their brains, and they think they're multitasking and they're not multitasking, and they're not giving their divided attention to the schoolwork or whatever they're supposed to be doing. And so what it is this constant sensory stimulation without really getting into deep thinking or really sort of consolidating something of that knowledge. And so because of that, that's when I really think parents have just got to implement this absolutely no screen time to let their little brains just relax and not have all of this stuff going on.
Absolutely. And we need to do that as well. If you're working full-time as a parent online, you've got to do that too. But the other thing that parents can do is take the kid's phone away. Take it away from them while it's lesson time. Give it back in the breaks. That would be so helpful to us as teachers, because you can see the kid looking down on Zoom.
I bet you can.
Or looking to the side on Zoom, and you can see that they're doing something else and they're not concentrating. And I do call kids out and say, you on your phone, can you put that down? And, we're setting Zoom rules. One of the rules is you can't be gaming or on your phone while you're on Zoom, but they're trying to get away with it. They will. So it would be helpful if parents took that away and even took away the second screen. They don't need that second screen.
No. And I think that's when parents have to really step up and help the teachers.
Yeah, I agree. Please, parents, will you do that for us? That'd be super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, really would.
Yeah.
So how do you think that online learning is different from being in the classroom for kids?
I think it's really funny. So I think during the actual online learning teaching, I think some of the kids are more engaged because they don't have to filter out everything else that's going on around them. I work with a lot of kids that really struggle to filter out the noise, or the kid next to them who's erasing too loudly, or the other kid that's yelling across the room. And so because they have this really hard time filtering out, they are missing the key concepts that the teachers are supposed to be telling them and teaching them. So I think with this one-on-one system, and, the teachers are kind of looking them in the eye. They might not be actually seeing all the kids at once, but our kids looks like that teacher's really close and looking them in the eye. So I think she can attend better on some of that really one-to-one sort of learning, the teaching, that traditional teaching model, which I think can be really great. And I have had some really positive feedback from some of the children that I work with, obviously do have some more difficulties, that some of this online learning has been brilliant for them. And especially for some of those kids that maybe don't have great confidence. And if the teachers ask them a question in class, they don't want to answer because they're worried that they've got the wrong answer. Or if they've got to read aloud their poem, they don't want to do that. Whereas the one-on-one learning or this style has actually really helped them. What I think is really difficult is the lack of that lovely social interaction that the kids need every day. And one of the other things I think that's really tricky is young kids, especially in primary school, we are tactile human beings, like tactile kids. Kids love to jump all over each other and kiss each other and hug each other. And we want that tactile stimulation. And I think not having that all day as well can be really difficult for the kids, so they don't get that chance to play and have those funny little moments. They're really enjoyable about being at school and with their peers. So I think that's a really difficult part about the online learning.
I absolutely agree with you. And it's so interesting to see some students flourishing in online learning and some really struggling.
Yeah.
Like it really just depends on your child. It depends on their personality. It depends maybe on whether they're introverted or extroverted. I don't know. Maybe the introverts. I'm completely making this up, by the way, listeners, so I don't know. But maybe the introverts enjoy it more and the extroverts don't. It's hard to know, but there's definitely some students who flourish and some students who struggle, and then some that are in the middle. And if you ask students, how's it going? Some are like thumbs up, great. Some are like thumbs sideways, it's okay. Some are like thumbs down, hate it.
Yeah.
So it really does vary from kid. And I think you've hit the nail on the head of how it is positive and negative.
Yeah, definitely. And I've heard some of my friends who've got high school children who being at school is really hard for them socially. And, you know, high school's difficult. You know, I don't work with a lot of high school kids. I remember being in high school. It's a difficult place to navigate because you're learning about yourself and you've got to try and figure out.
You're discovering your identity and the social groups.
Absolutely.
And finding your place in the world and having to think about your future, which can be intimidating and all of that. So it is difficult.
And I think them being able to maybe step away and just focus on their learning or focusing on the things that they really like doing without having to worry about all the other stuff that goes on. For them, I think they really like it. But for the others that need the social engagement or are desperately trying to get back to netball or football or dance, because, you know, they're maybe the more extroverts that derive their energy from being around others, I think for them it's probably really quite difficult.
Yeah. I think most kids miss the social interaction, even if they're just missing their one best friend.
Yeah.
And then others are missing a group of 20.
Yes.
But it really does. And I'm missing it. Like I'm missing the social interaction. Working at home and teaching at home is really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. You're literally sitting from 8 until 5 at your laptop, quickly grabbing a drink or something. And we've squished our day down to try and give the kids more time away from the screen in the afternoon. So that means that you're kind of faster paced during the day, it feels like. But at the same time, we've done so many things that are working so well for online learning. I think we've really got it going well. But yeah, it's just a crazy new world that we're having to get used to. And it'll be interesting to see in the future what elements of online learning will we keep.
I know. I've been thinking about that and I'm just not sure. I don't know.
Well, I think we'll definitely keep parent-teacher interviews online on Zoom. Absolutely brilliant. The parents love it.
Yep, I agree.
The timing's fantastic. You can write 5 minutes up, the next one's there. Yeah. See you later. But it's great. And parents love it because they can do it while they're at work and they don't have to get time off to trek all the way out here and move around from room to room. So I think that's something that we'll keep.
And I think in that way too, Jules, you can actually, as an OT or a teacher, you're kind of a bit more inclined to want to do them a bit more regularly because it's not a massive part of your day or your time. Like I'd be really happy for parents to go, hey, can I give you a quick 10-minute Zoom? I'll be, yep, boom, boom, boom. And more regularly than just doing a bigger one at the end of each term or block of therapy.
And I'm a pastoral head. So as somebody who looks after the social and emotional and academic development of the kids, we have to have one-on-one meetings with parents a lot. So that might continue on Zoom as well because it is just so convenient.
Yeah.
And I think when it's really serious, emotional, difficult issues, it's better to be face-to-face.
Yes.
But some of the, we're discussing the swapping of the curriculum or whatever, that could be done on Zoom. So it's going to be interesting to see how things evolve.
Well, let's face it, Zoom's the big winner in all of this, isn't it?
Yeah, I know. I wish I had shares in Zoom.
Well, we all do.
Don't you?
We all do.
I know, damn. What do you think some of the parents' biggest fears are when it comes to online learning?
I think just falling behind. I think that's the biggest fear. I felt really sad last week when the new year ones had to start because I just think back of when Isla had to start year one. It's just such a milestone in children's lives. you get them all dressed and their uniforms are too big and they have this big bag. It just looks ridiculous.
And you take the photos.
And you go in and you take them to the classroom. And I think just not having that normal start to the school year was really, really tough on the young ones. But I think especially for the year ones and probably the year twos, or depending on what system, the 5, 6-year-olds or 6, 7-year-olds, missing out on school effectively since January, their development is just such a quick trajectory. I think that's tough. And I think obviously the kindergartens and the year ones teachers did the absolute best they could, but they also know in these young years it's play-based. That's how they teach, that's how they learn, and then missing out on all of those other skills that they need to be able to go to school, like going to the toilet and washing your hands and getting out your lunch. And I think that could be a concern of being able to pick up those skills.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how kids develop with having this huge amount of time away from school. And I wonder how many other countries have missed so much school. I wonder if we're like up the top of how much kids are offline. I reckon we are. I reckon Hong Kong's missed more than like certainly the UK and the US and Australia. I really think that our kids are out of school for a long time.
Do you know what? I was actually thinking about this and I think you're absolutely right. But when I do compare and contrast some of my friends, say in America or England or Australia, I do think our school system here did a great job of getting the kids online learning quickly.
Really fast, straight away.
It blew my mind,
And the other thing that I thought about with Hong Kong is most people have access to technology. So that makes a massive difference.
Yeah.
Pretty much everybody has a laptop or a phone, or whereas in many countries and there are kids that just do not have that access. So how do you do online learning without a laptop or a phone?
And the schools here have been amazing. That obviously, if you've got 2 or 3 kids, you might not have 2 or 3 laptops. And so my daughter's school, you could just go in and they would give you a Chromebook to use at home.
Oh, see, that's amazing.
I didn't even really think of that because we did have an extra device. But it did really get me thinking that all these other children that don't have schools that can give out these really expensive computers, how are they going to manage?
I know. And also, like my friend who I work with has got 3 children. So she's at home and her husband and her 3 kids, 5 of them on Wi-Fi in the one house.
Yeah, it's crazy.
They're all dropping out. They're in a bit of a hot spot where it's not great Wi-Fi and they've paid a lot of money to try and get it improved. But there's still too many people online at once in the home. So that's stressful as well. I'm very lucky that I'm sitting at home on my own and I don't have anyone else, taking up my Wi-Fi or my bandwidth, I should say. Yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And I think until this sort of situation happened, we didn't think about those sort of things.
Yeah.
It just wasn't. And I think we just take it for granted in Hong Kong too, potentially in a bit more of the expat community or the international school community, that we do often have the financial means to have laptops and iPads, and we had to pay to upgrade our Wi-Fi. And you do have to think about those other children that don't have those advantages.
Yeah. And I think that's really why other countries haven't been online learning as long as we have.
Yeah.
I think that's a big factor. So how do you think we can make our children more positive and resilient when it comes to home learning?
I think it's really great to check in with your child every day and ask them 3 really simple questions. So I really like to ask my daughter, what's made you happy or happiest today? Because we know there's been a lot of research in terms of positive psychology, and that we know that the more we think about happy and positive thoughts, our connections in our brain actually strengthen to be happy. And so if we want them to draw on the happy things in their day, not the boring or the negative things, because I think that really helps set them up as an adult. And they could have had a really hard day at school or online doing something that they didn't like, but try and get them to think about the happy things. I think that's really, really important. Also, I think it's really important to ask what was hard for you and what did you do to overcome that challenge? Because I think when we have to think of times when things were hard and we overcame that challenge, that does help build resilience. And we need to be able to continue to build this resilience in our children. And what we want is them to have this bank of times in their heads when things were really, really hard and challenging, and we want them to have the solution and what happened in the end. So when they're continually going against things that are challenging for them, which they will encounter their whole life, they can draw on this bank of experiences that have been hard for them and ways to overcome those challenges.
And I think that's how parents can help them identify the challenges by having the conversation. Is there any other way that they can help them identify the challenges that they're facing?
I think it's really good as well to tell your children about some of the challenges that you're having and to use, emotive words that, I'm feeling really sad because today I've just found out the schools aren't opening again, which means blah, blah, blah. And obviously using appropriate language, but I think it's good for them to also see that mum and dad find things really difficult and my sister finds things difficult, and that's okay and that's part of life, and that we need to just find ways to overcome those challenges. And I think it's also good for them to be able to learn and calibrate what is a challenge and what's just a little bit of an issue, because I think sometimes as well something will happen and it just gets blown up all out of proportion, but it's not really that such a big deal. And so they've got to kind of also learn that in life, there is going to be little things and there's going to be big things, and you can't always be making the little things into the big things because it will just overwhelm you constantly.
Yeah, absolutely. And being resilient is all about bouncing back from setbacks. So It's identifying those setbacks and how do you bounce back? And I guess as parents, you've got to try and give your children the tools to bounce back. And really it's about communicating and looking for solutions and things like that. Do you agree?
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to open this conversation. Another question I like to ask my daughters, tell me something that made you laugh, again, to try and focus on those positives. And these are just the 3 questions that I ask my daughter, or we talk about, to sort of stimulate a bit of a conversation. And it's 3 questions that I quite often say to parents. These are some good questions to open up a conversation about your child's day instead of, how's your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing.
Yeah.
What'd you learn? Boring.
Yeah, typical, yeah. What made you happy? What made you laugh? And what's your other question?
And what was hard for you? And what did you do to overcome that challenge? Or what did you do to overcome that tricky situation? Or whichever word you want to use.
I like the way you're putting the positive first and then you come to the challenge later, so that they're focusing on what was good first, which is good for their well-being.
And I think that if you have the same 3 questions every single day, it becomes a habit. And then your children, start to expect those questions. So then they're mentally thinking about, what was funny today? Oh, yes, I had 5 funny things. Which one am I going to choose? Oh, I'm just going to tell you all of them.
Yeah.
And what was really happy? This and this really happy. And so not just trying to think of one thing, they just start getting, again, loads and loads of things that building up in their bank of memories that they can draw on as well. And so, you can choose any questions you like as family, as parents, but I really like that consistency every day.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a really good advice as well, because then it comes back to that routine, which kids really like. They like routines.
Yes.
So that's really good. What skills do you think parents need to have to help their children learn online? Because I know many people are like, I'm not a teacher. I can't do this. A lot of parents are very fearful of having to help their children study online. So what skills do you think parents need?
I think you need to be organised first and foremost. And I think the best thing to do is on Sunday afternoon, you need to be, depending on what sort of person you are. I'm quite visual. I like, old-fashioned calendar or paper and pen schedule so we can see what everyone's doing. Otherwise, some people like it in their phones. I think you really need to figure out what all the family is doing, because when you're not organised and you can't get onto the link or your laptop's not charged, that creates anxiety, and then that creates frustration, and that can create anger, and that can create resentment, especially if you as a parent need to be on a Zoom when the child's computer is not charged and they can't find the charger, right? So I think being organised is the absolute key. And I think a really strong morning routine, and the kids need to be getting up at least, I'm going to say, an hour and a half before they need to be on Zooms, an hour at the most, to set the tone for the day.
Yeah, I just did a webinar last night for the parents, And that was one of the things we said. They should get up at 7 and have a shower and then get changed and have their breakfast and then take some time to think about what they're doing and then get ready to start the day. We don't want students rolling out of bed at 8:15 to get on Zoom for the 8:20 start.
Yeah, I think so.
It's just that, they're bleary-eyed, they're still in their pajamas, they don't know what they're doing. And so I think that's really good advice. And what else do you think parents need along with the organisation? Like, I'm thinking patience is one, when the Zoom link doesn't work and when their child forgets something or their child isn't sure what they have to do. You've got to be patient, don't you? Otherwise, I know. Otherwise, just the stress levels in the house are going to rise dramatically, aren't they?
And I think use the teacher's experience and say to them, like, this is really hard. We're not coping with this. What can you tell me that we need to be doing? Like, you're the expert in this. Exactly what you said. Parents are not teachers. Teachers do not expect parents to be the teachers. We want to learn from you guys what the best solution is. And we've had situations where some of the kids we've worked with just absolutely refuse to get on the Zoom. It's just too sensory stimulating. They don't like with all the eyes looking at them and all the faces. That can be really intimidating for some of the kids we work with. So they spoke to the teacher and, all right, so instead of you doing the class one, you have to get on for 5 minutes for your registration, then you can hop off, and then we will do 2 10-minute personal ones for you during the day as well.
Brilliant. And also they can get off gallery view, like get on just the view on Zoom where it's only the teacher or whoever's speaking that comes up.
Yeah, and see, that's what I mean. We need to get to, the teachers need to tell us, the parents, try this, try that, and move the thing away, move it closer. But I also think parents need to absolutely just give themselves a break and think about what your mental health is doing. Parents at the moment in Hong Kong, a lot of families, there's financial stresses, people are losing jobs. We don't know, people's jobs are uncertain. Now, that's a really, really, really stressful. And so I think parents, if one of the days it's not working, that's fine. Just take them off, quick email to the teacher. This is what's happening. It's not going to work today. We will be up bright and early tomorrow. But today I need to look after myself as a parent because I cannot sit there and do whatever it is with my child anymore because I'm going to absolutely lose the plot because I'm thinking about my work in ABC. So I think really just trying to be very mindful of how you're feeling as a parent and trying to take some time out away from screens or to do some of those things to look after our own wellness and mental health is really important now too, Jules.
Definitely. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's important for parents to remember they're not the teacher and also they've still got to do their jobs, many of them, if they've still got their jobs. And sometimes the kids have to be independent. They've got to be independent at school and, work in the classrooms. Surely they can work on Zoom without parents hovering over all the time.
Yeah.
I think the organisation that you mentioned is really the key. If it's all organised and they've got their own space, like tell me about the space that a child should have for studying if you can.
I think, ideally they'll have some sort of desk or table that they can set up with their things. And even if you don't have a lot of space, having a cardboard box or just a plastic box that at the end of the day, each kid can put their own stuff in the box, put the lid on it, put it away. So out of sight, out of mind. So everything is organised. So I think that could be one really easy way.
I love that idea.
Children can be in a small space if they don't have their own personal desk. I think making sure that the children are comfortable at their desk because so often I'm seeing children and they're on these chairs that are too big and their feet are dangling and they're not comfortable. So when they're not comfortable or their little tummies aren't strong enough to support them in a big chair, they're moving around and they're fidgeting and they're not taking in the information. So making sure their feet are flat on the ground or they're at least supported. So stick some boxes or stick some books or a plastic box under them. If the chair's too big, stick a little cushion or a rolled up towel behind them, making sure they're changing their postures. We've got a therapy ball or a yoga ball in our house and I encourage my daughter to change positions. So when you're doing this Zoom, I want you to sit on the therapy ball because it gets them moving in different ways. And that's a really cheap option to have an additional chair or movement incorporated into their day. I get her to stand up. So, when you're doing your registration in the morning, I want you to be standing up. You don't have to be sitting down all day in that traditional desk situation.
You just need to lift your laptop or your computer up, don't you?
Absolutely.
Well, actually, Not really for little kids. For primary kids, they can just stand up and the computer will be in the same spot.
Yeah, when they're having to do their reading, or if I know a lot of the teachers in the younger years are reading stories to the kids. So instead of sitting there listening, tell your child, go and sit on your beanbag, put the laptop down next to it. You don't need to be looking at your teacher. You can just be listening to the story. So thinking about ways we can move their posture around and move their bodies around so they are more engaged in the actual learning.
That's really good advice, because that's, I think, one of the hardest things for me at the moment is being so sedentary for the whole day, sitting in the one spot. And I think that's another good thing that parents can do is know when the breaks are between lessons, know the timetable of your child's day so that you know at 10 o'clock you can go and grab them for 10 minutes and pull them away from the laptop. Because with kids, if you don't force them away, they're just probably going to sit there and get on YouTube or, chat on whatever. So it's probably a good idea to actually make that effort to connect with them in their short breaks to move them away from their devices.
And my daughter has a Garmin, like a kid's Garmin. So we set her.
What is that? Like a Fitbit, you mean?
Yeah, like a Fitbit.
Okay,
Fitbit. Yeah. And so what we've done is we've set her Fitbit to go off 10 minutes before every time she needs to be back on Zoom. So we don't have to actually remember. So she's got a Zoom at 10. Her Fitbit goes off at 9:50. So then she knows she's got 10 minutes to then go into the room, get herself sorted to go online. So we've got this thing going off all day, but it just means as well we don't have to be as on top of her.
That's brilliant.
Schedule.
What a great idea.
Yeah, and it's so easy.
That's a fab idea. I love it.
Yeah. And also,
especially for the younger ones.
And they all have them. So many kids have these Fitbits or Garmins. And it's a way that you don't necessarily have to be on the screen because, obviously kids can put it on their iPhones, etc. But it's sort of a way that we can have this alarm going off and help us keep on track. And she loves it. She's a massive creature of routine, and most children are, because at a lot of the schools, they're very dictated by the bells. So we're just sort of putting that they're already used to back into their homes. And that's been working really, really well for us.
So do you have any advice for parents who are working full-time and don't have time to monitor or support their children with their online learning? Because there must be a lot of people in that situation.
I think they need to just do maybe 1 or 2 check-ins during the day. Super quick on Zoom, put it in your diary, put it in your kid's diary. I know you've got a lunch break from 12 till 1. I'm going to Zoom you at 12 o'clock, have a really quick check-in with you, what you're doing, blah, 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 face-to-face if possible, not just via text. Because, again, we want to get them away from the screen. I guess that little bit more social connection as much as we can. And looking at someone's face, you get so much more social connection than, reading a text. And because they're not getting that so much at school, I think that's important. So I think, checking in with your kids, once or twice a day if you're having to be in the office. And then I think you can maybe talk to the teachers. And I think it's also reasonable that you could talk to your child's teacher and say, look, we're both working full time. We aren't at home to check in on our child. Can you let us know if they're not doing the work? Or at the end of every 2 weeks, can I send you a quick email just to make sure that Isla's keeping up with her work?
Yes, very good. So for people outside of Hong Kong who are listening and thinking, are people leaving their kids home alone with no parents?
Oh, yeah, true.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Jules, you're right.
Most people in Hong Kong have a helper, and it's a foreign domestic worker who often lives in with the family and would be sort of supervising or looking after the children during the day while they're Zooming. So that's another reason why we're able to have online learning for so long in Hong Kong, because so many other countries don't have that privilege as well. So we're so lucky here, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are.
Yeah, we really, really are. So I'm going to ask you, what are the benefits of living in Hong Kong during this difficult time? So that's one of them. And the fact that most people have access to technology. What are some of the other benefits of being here during this time?
I think one of the biggest benefits of living in Hong Kong right now is our sense of community. I think that's helped all of us really pull through these really difficult times, because effectively we're stuck here for who knows how long. We can't get home and see our family and our loved ones. And that's really, really difficult for all of us. And I think our sense of community has just become stronger during this time. I think we're all going through this together. We all have very similar experiences with the online learning and it going back and then it not going back. So I think that really does tie us together. I think the fact that we do have helpers is just such a huge, huge privilege that we're just so lucky, because it does mean that we still can go out and exercise. We can go out and we can see our friends, and we can still...
Only in groups of 2 at the moment.
Only 2 with masks, absolutely, all the time. I'm a massive stickler to the rule. Ask my friends. They're like, oh my gosh, stop. I'm like, no, I'm very black and white. I like a rule. I stick to it.
Yeah.
No problem. But I do think that's been the biggest benefit, that we're all very aware of the situation that we are in. And I think we all are very compassionate towards each other during this time.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's lovely. Hong Kong is a great place. And the other thing is that people may not know from overseas is that there's quite a lot of space here. You think Hong Kong is just a city full of high rises, but there are a lot of parks and there are a lot of places that people can get out in nature and they can look after their well-being. So we're very lucky for that, because at the moment, gyms are shut, pools are shut, and all of these sort of places where we normally do our activities are closed. I don't know when this podcast comes out if that'll still be the case, but it is while we're recording it. So we are lucky to have the space that we do in Hong Kong as well. And the beautiful weather, like this summer has been unreal. It's been ridiculous.
Just the beautiful, clear skies.
Well, that's a bonus of COVID, isn't it?
It really
is. All the factories in China have closed down or are not working as much. So the pollution is just non-existent.
Absolutely. And I think there's so much to be said by getting out in nature, getting a hit of vitamin D, getting out of your apartment and exercising. We know exercise is so great for your mental health, but sort of doing all of those things together is just absolutely vital.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you think are the disadvantages for students and parents during this time?
I think the biggest disadvantage is the unknown, because we just don't know when it's going to end. I think that's a disadvantage for all of us all over the world at the moment. But just this constant sort of on a treadmill, but not really going anywhere, I think is really difficult. I think for the primary school kids, I think they're just going to get through it. They're going to look back on this and be like, oh, yeah, I remember that time. And I think the lack of activities and being able to go out and do physical exercises is difficult. I think for the high school students, it must be quite stressful going into their second or last year at high school under these circumstances. And, not being a high school teacher, Jules, I'll defer to you on this, but I think that must be really tough to have that really great experience taken away from you.
Yeah, I think particularly for year 13 last year, it was really hard that they didn't have all of the events and the farewells, and we had very unusual graduations, which were all social distance and masked and no parents, only parents on Zoom and things like that. So it was hard, I think, for those students who have missed out on all of those milestones that you have at the end of the year. But I guess they've got something amazingly different that will go down in history, really, won't it?
Yeah.
They were a part of it.
Yeah.
So it is difficult. And I think also to add to that is the social isolation. We are social creatures. And for those people who live alone or single children, small families, things like that, it's really hard. And then we're all isolated. Us expats are isolated from our families as well overseas. So that's very difficult too. And we don't know when we'll see them.
I think that's the hardest part.
That's really hard for a lot of people. And then how do you think schools might change the way that they operate after all this is over? We kind of talked already about parents' evening on Zoom and the way we'll use technology a little bit differently. Do you have any other insights into what you think might happen?
You know what? I don't. I'd like to see less screens used in schools after this prolonged time with children using screens. I'd like to see a little bit more physical education and sport, them getting out and playing every day. Maybe them looking at some of the environments in the primary school and thinking about how can we incorporate nature back into our playgrounds and into our classrooms so they can have a little bit more of that experience. So I know that kind of a bit more practical. I don't know in terms of teaching if there's any things that have come out of this about the way that the curriculum is or the way that they teach or don't teach. I think that'll be interesting. I guess if they're comparing scores or marks or tests from year to year, time will tell which system works best. But I think generally, the teachers have done a brilliant job of adapting and showing our children how to be resilient, but also making sure that they are engaged in their learning and that they are at school and they still need to participate. And I think that's been really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's great with Zoom that they've got the breakout rooms. I've just discovered this new thing called Jamboard on Google. It's absolutely brilliant where you can put the kids in breakout rooms, you can get them onto Jamboard, and you can see as the teacher what they're doing on Jamboard and get them all on creating things and writing things and group work and mind maps and stuff. And you don't have to go in and out of the breakout rooms. So it's just brilliant. I can see what each kid is doing. It's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just
so
great.
I really recommend that to any teacher.
Yeah.
Jamboard's awesome. I'm using it loads already. I've just discovered it. So that's something that's come out of this. Is we're looking at new technologies and new methods to get the kids to connect while they're online. And they're proving to be awesome and things that we can use when we come back. Or we can do a similar thing, but offline.
Yes.
You know, we can do the same kind of concept, but offline.
Yeah. And I sometimes think with this online learning, the children that maybe aren't traditionally the loudest or the ones that are more the leaders have a little bit more time to shine, because it's kind of a bit of an equalizer when they're in these little breakout rooms, as opposed to when they're in class and it's usually the loudest kid or that, they're shutting the other kids up. Whereas in this way, I do think sometimes all of the children can have a little bit more input. So I think that's a really great consequence of being online and teaching in these ways, because when they're in their breakout room, it's quiet and they've only got to kind of contend with these 3 other kids, as opposed to being in the classroom and just getting distracted by what's going on.
Absolutely. And I've noticed some of the shyer kids are more willing to put their emoticon hand up and speak on Zoom. And also they can write stuff in the chat. So if I need, if I've got everybody working on a task and maybe they're writing 6 things that they're grateful for, say, then they can copy and paste that and put that all in the chat for me so I can see what every kid is doing. And they can send it to me privately. So not everybody else has to see what they're doing. So it gives them the confidence to share more. So it's actually, there's some real benefits.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
It's showing you what their learning is, as opposed to them being a bit too shy to tell it in class. So I think there's some really great benefits, especially, again, some of the children that I work with, that language isn't always easy for them.
Yeah, definitely. So lastly, Leith, what advice would you have for parents whose children are not working well in the online learning system?
So for children who are really struggling in the online learning space, I think number one, you actually have to sit down and say, yep, I know it's hard, but you're going to do it anyway. To put some really concrete rules into your child's day that this is still the expectation. When you go to school, do you say to Ms. Hannaford, don't want to do this, it's too hard, doesn't wash when you're at school? So put some expectations in, build some rewards into their day, absolutely build some rewards, build some time that they can spend with you or dad or another caregiver as another reward. I also think long-term rewards can be really useful for these sort of kids. So say if they want a Nintendo game, a new pair of trainers, a new football or something, yep, you can absolutely have that, but we need to do 15 days of online learning when you do 4 lessons a day without whinging, and then you can get your football or something at the end. So I think rewards, setting up the expectations, and also discussing with the teachers what is the thing that's really important for them to do. Like, okay, they have to do their maths and their unit of inquiry, or they've got to put in this assignment, this, and this. That's not so important for me. And so having that balance, that this is the non-negotiable, what you will be doing, this is the nice to have, and then work from there.
Perfect. What great advice. I couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks,
That was
Jules.
awesome. If people want to find you and Young Folk Therapy, how can they do that?
So best go to our website, www.youngfolktherapy.com. We have a contact form on there. If you have any questions, we get back to you within about 24 hours. We're also on Facebook and Instagram. And so you can find us in all of those places.
Okay, brilliant. And your blog is on your webpage, Young Folk Therapy webpage?
Yes, it is.
Great. So if people want to look at the online learning blog, then go there. And I'll put the links to both of the website and the blog in the show notes. So Leith, thank you so much for coming to talk to me today. This has been so interesting, and it's been great because it's something that I, as a teacher, can contribute to. So it's been a really great discussion.
Oh, Jules, this has just been such a great podcast. I love listening to your podcast. I think
thank you.
You interview such great people in Hong Kong.
Aren't there some amazing people in Hong Kong?
It's just amazing. I am a massive podcast fiend. So being on your podcast is just a dream come true. So I have loved it. And thank you for all your advice as well.
Oh, thank you so much. For my listeners out there, if this is a podcast that you've really enjoyed, or you think that your friends and family would benefit from hearing all about how to online learn well in this day and age, then please share this podcast with them. And if you can go to iTunes to rate and review us, that'll help me get Hong Kong Confidential up the iTunes charts, and it will help people find Leith and Young Folk Therapy. So thank you so much for your time today. It's been really, really wonderful, and it's just been such a timely, topical conversation that needs to be had. So I'm going to put it on earlier on the podcast because I've got podcast scheduled up until December. But I'm going to get it in earlier while we're on online learning because it will be so helpful for our listeners.
That's great. Thanks, Jules.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it. I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.